Good evening, everyone. I know folks are coming into the space, so we will open up in just a second. We want to give a chance for folks to transition in the Zoom room. Okay, well, we will go ahead and open up. Thank you for your patience. So welcome again, and thank you for joining us on this Monday evening. This past weekend, many of us were involved and busy with joyous activities of graduation, including some of our guests you'll be hearing from shortly. But this evening is a great opportunity for us to turn our attention to offering what we at the Create Center hope will be especially insightful to continuing students. Additionally, we anticipate the event will be insightful to faculty, staff, and students from outside of U of M who may be joining us. So I'm Dr. Camille Wilson. I'm the founder and director of the Create Center. And CREATE stands for Community-Based Research on Equity, Activism, and Transformative Education. I am also a University Diversity and Social Transformation professor here at the University of Michigan and a professor of Education Foundations, Leadership and Policy in our School of Education. But this evening is about our students and alum. I'm so excited that we will have 4 very talented and ambitious equity-oriented scholars to offer their insights about conducting critical qualitative dissertation research online. And this is a process none of them could have envisioned needing to do before the pandemic, yet as we will hear, they are navigating the act of doing so as conscientiously as possible and responding to a variety of social, cultural, methodological, racial, educational contexts, right? There's just, you'll hear just so much richness and aspects of diversity in their work and in their process and in their questions. So we're just really excited to provide this student-centered program this evening from the Create Center and anticipate just lots of great wisdom shared. And also, I'm thanking them ahead of time. I know that they have come with a willingness to share, the challenges quite transparently with the hope of offering support and mentoring, especially to continuing students and those who are also polishing that dissertation to submit and spread their wings. So we have an alum joining us as moderator, Dr. Laura Ann Jacobs, who is a postdoctoral research fellow with the National Center for Institutional Diversity, also called NCID. And she works with NCID's Stepping Up Against Racism and Xenophobia project, SPARKS. Dr. Laura Ann graduated from the University of Michigan in 2021 with a doctorate in educational studies. She specialized in literacy, language, and culture. Her dissertation focused on preparing secondary English language arts teachers for anti-racist pedagogical change. Her work centers around how people individually and collectively translate stated commitments of justice into action for the purpose of social change. So with that, I am going to pass it off to Dr. Laura Ann Jacobs, and she will take us from there.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, and thank you to the Create Center for hosting this wonderful event to learn from these very thoughtful scholars. And thank you to everyone for attending this evening. I thought I might let you know a little bit about how tonight is going to be moving through. I have a little note that says if you're interested in maybe having the full panel experience for yourself, an option that you can do on Zoom is you can pin the panelists by clicking the 3 circles in the top right of the boxes and pinning them. You could turn off your video, hide other participants. It's your choice on how you want to view it. You could do speaker view, but just a few other ways that you could engage with the panel if you want to feel like we're all together for real, for real. So happy for everyone to be joining us today. The way that we're going to go through is I will introduce our panelists this evening, and then they'll each have a few moments to share about their experiences with their dissertation, designing their studies, collecting their data, and for those who have written and or defended, we can hear from them as well. So yeah, so I'll go ahead and begin by introducing our panelists. First of all, we have Reuben Kapp. Welcome, Reuben. Reuben is a fourth-year doctoral candidate studying higher education at the Center for the Study of Higher and Post-Secondary Education, CSHPE. His research interests include college access, enrollment management, sense of belonging and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Reuben is committed to expanding college access for first-generation, low-income, and students of color, in addition to helping students navigate the challenges of a rapidly changing higher education landscape. Thank you, Reuben. I'm wondering if there's anything else you would like to add to your bio as we welcome you tonight.
No, I think you hit it. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Andwatta Barnes. Andwatta Barnes is a former elementary school, adult school, and university lecturer currently working towards her PhD in teaching and teaching education at the University of Michigan. Her research currently focuses on examining issues surrounding racialized teacher identity across international teaching contexts. Prior to coming to the University of Michigan, her professional experiences involved teaching English as a foreign language in Japan and China, teaching English literature and assessment as an English language fellow in Qatar, pre-service teacher education and ESL at the university level in the United Arab Emirates, and several years as an assessment specialist developing standardized assessments in the areas of ESOL teacher licensure and English language proficiency at Educational Testing Service. Thank you for joining us, Andwatta. Is there anything you would like to add to share with us today?
I'll talk about it more, but that my research is mostly focused on teacher knowledge. For my dissertation, it's on teacher knowledge rather than teacher identity specifically.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Andwatta. We're really looking forward to hearing how you share how the things that you're doing continue to change and evolve. So thank you so much for being here. We also have Paulina Fraser. Paulina is a doctoral candidate in educational studies at the School of Education. As a first-generation Filipina American, Paulina's dissertation project is centered on historical preservation, community partnerships, and collaborative education, specifically focusing on Filipinx communities. She also works with the Ginsberg Center, where she facilitates workshops to support students doing community-engaged work. Thank you for joining us, Paulina. And I'm wondering, is there anything else you would like to add or share to your bio tonight?
No, you pretty much hit it on the head there. Thanks, Laura, and excited to be with you all today.
Thank you, Paulina. And then I would also like to introduce Dr. Maggie Hanna, who is a recent graduate, quite recent, of Literacy, Language, and Culture at the University of Michigan School of Education. Maggie is a former bilingual elementary school teacher. She is an instructor of elementary teacher education and a collaborator in school-university partnerships and urban community-focused literacy initiatives. Her area of inquiry is focused on family engagement through literacy programs in school and community-based settings. She believes that care and community building are tools for resisting systemic inequality. Thank you so much, Dr. Hanna, for joining us tonight. And I'm wondering, is there anything else that you would like to add or share about yourself as we begin this evening?
I don't think so. Thank you, everybody. And yeah, just keep that in mind. It's been kind of a busy couple of days. I defended on Friday and then graduated Saturday. So I might not be as sharp as my bio sounds today, but I'm so excited to be here with you all.
We're really looking forward to you joining us tonight as your first official doctor event. So what a celebration. Wonderful. Okay, let's see. So tonight's conversation is about conducting critical qualitative dissertation research online amidst the continued complexities of the pandemic. And I was thinking that based on when you collected or what stage you are in your process, that might make sense for us in terms of sharing about your work. So I was thinking we could start with Reuben and then Andwatta and Paulina, who will be logging back on in just a moment, and then Dr. Hanna. Does that sound okay for each of you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
All right,
is
Reuben.
this is the portion where I get, is it 5 to 7 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Or just, okay, just wanted to make sure. And
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time in the panel. But before I start, I do want to give another shout out to Maggie. That's awesome. As someone who's working towards my dissertation, I can't wait to get to that day. And I'm sure there's folks that are in the audience today that are just looking forward to that day. So I think, Maggie, you kind of inspire others, such as myself, that will eventually get there. Yeah, I will talk a little bit about kind of like my journey. And I think, and again, I don't want to eat up too much time. I want to be respectful. But I will say that, if there's one word to talk about my journey as I'm kind of collecting my research or collecting my data and moving forward, I would say that the word that really sticks out is uncertainty. And that is, I'll kind of give you a timeline and tell you kind of like how I got to where I am right now in my research. And it really actually started with Camille's course. I was taking critical race methodologies, which is a great course. I don't know if folks have taken it. Highly recommend it if you haven't taken it. But it was actually in Camille's course, and I don't know if you remember, Camille, where we had just first heard about the coronavirus. And if you recall, that day you had told us that, hey, I'm not going to tell you that whether you have to stay here in class or go home, but there's this university email that tells us that we might not be seeing each other for a while. And that was actually my last like in-person course. So it was really in that course so my work is really on access. And I worked 4 years in the University of Michigan Office of Undergraduate Admissions, and being a first gen, low income, Latino, pretty much all the boxes, I got to see firsthand in that office really how really the gaps in college access. And really that really just started off my interest in working, doing this research in terms of gaining access for marginalized students. So to kind of give you a timeline of how it's worked for me is my journey has had some twists and turns in terms of where I am actually today and the research I'm doing. And I'll talk about the research I'm doing today, but I guess the point I'm trying to really highlight to others is, and maybe others such as Maggie can shed light to this, is that I think it's okay to have twists and turns in your journey in working on your dissertation. And that's at least how I feel. Like you might hit a roadblock and you might have to go an opposite direction. And my topic has actually kind of changed a little bit. So originally in Camille's course, I was looking at interviewing students of color, looking at how the disparities in access to your selective institutions, right? And in time, what I've been working on now is I've been doing research, and it's funded by the Gates Foundation, on how the COVID-19 has impacted college enrollment. So really how I got to where I am today with the research I'm doing is I had a conversation with one of my buddies who worked in the admissions office, and he had told me that, hey, originally I was talking about, what are you seeing among the students? And he was basically telling me that with COVID-19, institutions have, particularly Michigan, have found ways to really broaden their reach in terms of helping with access for students who may have never accessed universities. And really that was the mechanism really driving that was like Zoom, like having these like Zoom meetings, some of them tailored towards DEI for students looking to go into like the University of Michigan. So my research is kind of, it's kind of transforming. I want to say transforming and evolving, because that's what it is, to where now I am actually looking at how institutions are working in this climate where with the COVID-19 and everything else going on with, Black Lives Matters and everything, and how they are adjusting to really help for access for marginalized students. So my work now, I'm actually conducting interviews, but the interviews that I'm doing is actually with enrollment managers. And this is actually part of the work that I'm getting paid to do. So it's interesting because the work that I am doing now will actually be allowed to be incorporated into my dissertation. And the next phase where I am now in terms of getting data is I will now have to go into potentially interviewing enrollment or admissions counselors that are on the ground. So I think the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway for me, at least, and I don't know if the other panelists can shed light to this, is that interviewing folks online is a whole nother beast. It's just, you lose that relationship, and you try and establish rapport with someone on like a Zoom setting. It's so much different than what you may have learned in some of your methodology courses. So for me, I'm getting through it. I think the biggest challenge now is this second round of interviews. While I'll now be looking to interview more folks, And then also like thinking about how to tie a critical lens, critical lens to the research that I'm doing. So I'm very early. I still have my proposal that's due this fall. But I think, again, I think the main thing I'm really taking away from this is that it's okay to have some of those challenges and yes, changes, if you want to say. And I guess I see Maggie kind of like nodding her head there, and I think that's just part of the journey. And I'm interested to see what other panelists say and maybe what questions folks have today. But I think that's my time. I don't want to go too much longer. And I hope that was helpful, kind of learning about the research I'm doing.
Thank you so much, Reuben. And we'll also have the opportunity at, after each panelist shares, for the audience to also ask questions, which you're welcome to include into the chat. You can private message, you could throw them all out there, and we'll be looking kind of at things that are commonalities or things that are similarities or differences across this experience for each of you. So as the audience continues to think about what they're learning from each of you and what you may have in common or questions that they may have about their own work, please include those in the chat for us, okay? Thank you, Reuben. And so Andwatta, I'd like to invite you now to share.
Okay. 7 minutes. I'll try. Okay. So I am a 5th year doctoral candidate, and I defended a year ago. Defended my proposal a year ago. And I have already collected my data, and I am in the process of analyzing it at this time. What I want to talk about also is something that Reuben kind of touched on, which is the idea of doing interviews using Zoom and the issue or concern of regarding rapport. And but it sort of at a little bit a higher level, rapport, I think, like methodologically is under reciprocity, which was something that I focused on considerably in my in the design of my whole dissertation. But as much as I had focused on it, I got great feedback because Dr. Wilson, Camille, is on my dissertation committee and provided some great feedback in my proposal defense regarding questions or things that she wanted me to think about in terms of reciprocity. And so if you're not familiar with reciprocity, it is, it's basically about the researcher being engaged in the data and the participants, okay, and finding something that makes the participants' cooperation worthwhile. So it's really important to think about, especially when you're doing qualitative research where you're interacting with the participants. And in my case, I'm using only interviews, but a series of interviews with a very specific teaching population. And so the things that I really had to reflect on was, even though I'm doing, going to be at this was before I conducted the interviews, like, okay, if I'm going to be doing these interviews, and I know that I had for my prelim, I did interviews that were face-to-face. So I went back to the UAE and did interviews with Black teachers then. This time it's interviews with Black teachers through Zoom. So I really wanted to think about, like, how can I ensure that my participants feel like the importance of being in the study, and that that they connected with it, that it seemed useful to them, and that they actually, to be honest, like, enjoyed the process of being a part of the study, which means that as in qualitative research, the researcher is the instrument, right, or the tool, or we're the ones who can drive a lot of this. So in addition to making sure that my participants were well compensated, I put a lot of thought into the things that I could do in order to bridge the gap between where I am and where they are. So my study focuses on Black American women who are teaching children in public and charter schools in the United Arab Emirates. And they are teachers that I found by, like, one teacher I found because I knew her, and because I used to live in the UAE as well. But she connected me to other teachers she thought would be interested in the study. I noted this as something that could be of assistance in bridging this gap, this rapport concern that I had about doing these interviews, because it makes, especially considering that which I didn't mention, I'm using Black feminism, Black feminist theories, Black feminist epistemology in particular in my research, and it was a major part of the design of my dissertation. And looking at the study and the interviews through Black feminism means that I need to privilege, and first of all, center the Black women in my study, or make sure that they are centered, and to make sure that that when the interviews are actually more like conversations. I mean, I didn't plan this deliberate, like I didn't really think about it, but I have a tendency when I interview to go in depth and less, like, even though it's semi-formal as far as the questions and things, it's a bit more relaxed, and I allowed the participants to sort of drive the conversations at times. So, and these are things that are really important in Black feminist methodology. When I, talk to the teachers about things that they experienced that were similar to things that I experienced, I didn't hold off and like remove myself from the interview as though I'm, this objective interviewer. But I did share, and in fact, at the beginning of each interview, I shared my own experiences that I thought the teacher should know, especially the first interview with each teacher. I told them about me. I started off with, what do you want to know about me? And when they just talked about me, they wanted to know, so what do you do? Okay, where did you go? Where did you teach? How was it for you? So this is the process. And we did this all over Zoom. And like I said, I had 6 teachers total, now down to 5. I only knew one of them, but the rest I met, and over the course of a few months and doing 3 interviews with them, I felt like that rapport built up, and it really developed in some very interesting ways that, like, there's a lot of Black feminist research on like the ways in which Black women interact and sort of ways that we sort of try to connect with one another through our body language, our facial expressions, through the language, our word choices, code switching, we're formal, professional women, and then slipping into things like, girl, let me tell you, blah, blah, blah. And again, these are things that that I made notes of because I was really interested in capturing sort of the nature of the study, so the methodology side of this. Okay, I know I went over.
You did not go over, you did great. Thank you so much for sharing, Andwatta. Really appreciate hearing from you. And of course, we'll have the opportunity to ask and learn some more from you in our Q&A. So Paulina, I'd like to invite you now to share a little about your work and your experience and your journey, please.
Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Paulina. So I am a 6-year doctoral candidate, and it's become an identity that I have a lot of pride in. But something more important to me, is really my identity as a first-generation Filipino American, child of immigrants raised by different communities. So that's something that I hold very dearly. And I want to just use as an opportunity to shape kind of some of the research that I do. So I was born and raised in California, and my unique and isolated experience as a Filipina in Michigan has really allowed me to commit deeply, I think, to focusing on Filipino communities really exclusively. It's something that I really dove into, I think, just because of the experience growing up in California versus being in Michigan was very stark and contrasting for me. So a lot of my research right now in terms of my dissertation, which I am in the middle of, it explores the phenomena around Filipino communities and their efforts around historical preservation, community engagement, and collaborative knowledge for the purpose of liberatory and decolonizing practices in education. So kind of what that means is, there's a lot of richness that Filipino communities and out of a lot of grassroots movements, they've contributed a lot in terms of not just to the American historical storyline, but also to education. And a lot of that actually is not included. It's not part of the literature, that's generated in K through 12 or even in higher education. And especially in my own experience of being in Michigan, really seeing that kind of lack of knowledge and documentation, it was really concerning for me. And through a lot of my own literature review, as I was coming through this program, trying to figure out and solidify kind of a research topic, I was really coming from the perspective actually of having to read literature that was created by Filipino scholars or Filipino people who didn't make it through academia, and having to realize that actually there is a tremendous amount of wealth of knowledge out there and documentation, but it's just not widely accessible, especially through academia. And so it got me kind of on this I think train of why are we not using a lot of this information, especially in K through 12, where this is impacting a lot of youth of color, Filipino youth, just in general for the sake of learning and teaching. And so that really led me to doing a lot of the work that's focused on collaborative and collective labor towards an approach of humanizing, sustainable, and decolonizing practices in education, where this is not just something happening in Filipino communities, but in a lot of other communities of color, indigenous communities, where it's just not being included or represented in mainstream schooling, especially in the United States. So a lot of my research I hope to do, is address what, communities of color, but really what Filipinos have and still are preserving and recording in terms of their own histories, in terms of their own social movements, education, curriculum, teaching material, things like that are not usually recognized as official sources of knowledge. So within my dissertation, I really hope to explore how those different types of partnerships amongst educators, historians, community leaders, elders, children, right, the youth, that's really the foundation of improving the education for youth of color and exposing broader audiences to the contributions of communities of color, indigenous communities, and ultimately Filipino Americans. So while that was and is my pitch for my dissertation, I found out that with a pandemic, it is real hard to just go in and try to do the work that you are passionate about and that you want to do, because originally this beautiful idea of mine was birthed through an ethnographic study where I really wanted to get into and immerse myself into the communities that I call home, to kind of get a sense, of some of the practices culturally that they were doing to kind of help promote and preserve and produce a lot of these educational practices, the pedagogy, things like that, that were just really important, I think, for furthering and decolonizing education. What I found out, though, that in reality, on the onset of the pandemic, when my data collection was really essentially supposed to be starting, and I had kind of gotten on the momentum of what exactly I wanted to do, the accessibility became a huge issue for me, where I just wasn't able to kind of really grasp down any concrete details when it came to timing. Interviews were like out of the question. I was getting responses very rarely. And it was just, I could tell the communication was just kind of, people were just trying to survive and get through the pandemic. And I kind of had to really check myself and be accountable for my own positionality, because on one hand, I was, and still am, a doctoral student candidate that was doing this research and I want to get this done on a specific timeline. And on the other hand, that is really not the work that I'm doing, from a ideological standpoint. I am not here to extract information from communities that I hold sacred from me just for the sake of a degree, right? That goes against a lot of the practices and ideology that I come from. So having to think about like, okay, I have a timeline, I have a dissertation that needs to get done, and I want it specifically to be an ethnographic study, but that is actually not going to be feasible anymore because it would require me to push and press very unnecessarily on these communities, on these people, and on their time that, you know, especially with, you know, the pandemic, just was not appropriate or ethical or humanizing. So aside from what I really wanted to do and what I hope my study would do, because I really wanted to center the communities and the people and really get that ethnographic detail, I had to change my study to a case study, which, you know, is not to say anything negative about case studies, but it definitely was different for me. And I think the framing and the shifting was something that I had to, you know, really be, I had to just really sharpen myself on the different types of approaches to humanizing and community-based work that I could do. And I had to really be flexible and fluid in allowing myself to kind of get the work done without having to extract from these communities and from these people, and focus instead on, you know, the people themselves to researching artifacts and archives and kind of going that route. And so while that was hard for me on a personal level, I think as a researcher and a scholar, especially a critical one, it became very important for me to center you know, what that meant and what I was not going to do and how I didn't want to contribute harm to the relationships and the reports, the communities that I've, you know, that I've worked with in the past, and the people that have mentored me along the way, where I felt entitled almost to some of, you know, being able to be in their space and interview them and work with them in this ethnographic way. And really needing to step back and just honor, like, that is actually not going to be the direction I can go for this study, and it's going to have to change. And so with that, you know, the research design obviously changed, and so did a lot with that. But ultimately, I think, you know, that challenge presented an opportunity for myself to just sharpen myself as a scholar, and kind of open up the lane for myself to also take on a different approach to research design that I might have not been as familiar with. And so now I think I also frame it as, you know, the artifacts and the archives that I'm working with would not be there if not for people. And so, you know, to be able to kind of still bring in pieces and elements of what I wanted to do before with what I can feasibly do now, it was a tough pill to swallow, but I think in humbling myself, it was definitely the most appropriate way to go. That was humanizing and ethical and sustainable for the work that I want to do and the work that I hope to do in the future to just pick up on, you know, once there's some sort of normalcy again, after the pandemic. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself and my story. Thanks so much for letting me share with you all.
Thank you so much, Paulina. And already in my mind, I'm hearing some threads and themes and similarities as we're building across these and thinking about, especially, you know, Andwatta's comments about reciprocity and rapport and the importance of honoring and centering our participants. And then hearing also, Paulina, you mentioning what it means, you know, to do things in humanizing ways. So those are some things that a little sneak preview for what might be coming after Dr. Hanna shares. And also those of you who have questions, I would encourage you again also to remember the chat as we continue to move forward. Dr. Hanna, I'd like to invite you to share a little bit about your journey and your experience.
Great.
Please.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So just to respond to Reuben, I was thinking about how my trajectory changed in so many different ways. But right after I did my prelim in the winter of 2019, I had done like just a preliminary study at the organization that I ended up doing my full dissertation with. But I also received a public scholarship grant to create a literacy program and work with that, just one of the sites at the organization. So up until about December 2019, I was going to study the literacy program that I had was designing. And then I took my prelim to the Literacy Research Association conference and got some feedback, and I realized, wow, I have a lot here already, and I have more questions. So in January 2020, I proposed a new study, and my committee was like, okay, you know, it's going to be a change, but it's okay to do that right now. So I proposed a case study of the organization. So in my preliminary work, I had just looked at one neighborhood site, and I was kind of zooming out to the bigger organization and hoping to learn more about several of the neighborhood hubs. It's like community centers. And so January 2020, and then March 2020, everything turned to an online case study now. So there are several different changes in that trajectory in lots of different ways. And all along the way, while I collected data over the year, essentially between September 2020 and September 2021. So I think that is expected. And in my experiences, I've seen, you know, my colleagues grow with their work. There's always a lot of changes to come. So don't feel bad about any of those, you know, of those changes. You'll get to where you're going, I'm sure. So essentially I did a qualitative case study of an educational organization, which is an out of school space and has neighborhood hubs, as I mentioned. I was able to do 42 observations, all virtually. And so as you can imagine, the difference between what I expected I was going to do, which is, you know, drive to these places, sit down with people, really be part of the work, it really changed a lot. And I also did observations of literacy programs, which were also online. I conducted 32 interviews online. Some of those actually were also just on the phone. Some of the community members that I spoke with preferred just to speak on the phone. So I did that. And essentially, what I'd like to share about is some of the challenges of the observations, particularly the observations with literacy programs, because I was connecting with the staff, and then they were connecting me via email with some email address of someone who didn't know me, who hadn't seen me in the staff meetings, who didn't know who I was. And then I'd have to connect with them and say, hello, I am this person, and this is what I'm doing. And I'd please like to come to your Zoom call. And if you could please let the families know I would like to come to the Zoom call, and ask if that's okay with everyone. And then eventually I would get into the Zoom call, and no one, I'd have to kind of awkwardly interrupt oftentimes to make sure that I had permission to be there. So that was definitely one of the harder things to do. And when I did my preliminary study, I went to the neighborhood hub, I sat in on the literacy programs, and I was able to chat with parents and connect with their kids and, you know, like smile with them. And one of the times I was sitting in the back taking notes, and a toddler came over and just brought me a book and said, read this. So it was just like a completely different experience than when I was, you know, just like a little box on the Zoom call. So it really was harder, much harder than I expected, to connect with the parents, the community members. The emails for some of the staff, even, I would send out emails and really just hear nothing for a while. But then I had a lot of folks who were very responsive, and some who knew me from before, which was really helpful, but a lot of people who did not know me. So it was a lot of relationship building and being present, and just being persistent. Sometimes I had to send a couple of emails and someone say, oh, I totally forgot. Of course, we can set up that interview. Here's my calendar. So let's see. I guess my advice for other students is something that Dr. Wilson also reminded me that, and I saw in my interviews, people, there is something about having the opportunity to sit down and talk about things that are important to you that is really nice. So I felt a little bit like burdensome sometimes. When I was asking for people at a nonprofit that's very busy and fast paced, I was asking for their time. But what I did find was it was actually very generative and thought provoking, and they really opened up quite a lot during those interviews. So for the staff, I usually did 2 interviews, and sometimes we would only get through like two or three questions in the very first interview because they really just wanted to talk about some of the things. It was also the pandemic, so all of us were siloed and isolated, and I think that also created a space, especially for the parents that I spoke with, to reflect a little bit and talk about how the organization had been helpful to them during the pandemic, and as they were oftentimes still alone in their homes with their kids, but able to virtually come together. I was just thinking about Paulina, and I think I said this to you the other day when I talked to you, but really like allowing as a researcher and someone who had an idea of what you wanted to do, like allowing ourselves to sort of grieve what couldn't be in this space a little bit, and know that this is just the first stop. If the study that you wanted to do isn't possible right now, you are becoming a researcher. So the next one, make it possible, hopefully. Okay, I think that's all for me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Maggie. I'm trying to get my emojis going so I can throw a little party popper to all of you to thank you for sharing about your experiences and your journeys and some of the things that you changed or adapted or ways that you had to be flexible. Yeah, throw those clap hand emojis up if you're everybody in the audience. Let's do it. It's wonderfully inspiring to me to hear your perspectives and the things that are going on with you. And I do have a few questions that I would like to ask you that I think that we can learn from each of you and your wisdom and your experiences. And then I'll also open the space for audience members to ask questions. But I was thinking, Reuben, one of the very first things that you said was one word that would describe this would be uncertainty. And then I was thinking, Maggie, here you are kind of closing these panel presentations, and you said, let me pull my little notes because I love the way you said it. You said you'll get to where you're going, I'm sure, which felt like a really strong commonality there. And of course, Paulina and Andwatta, some shared themes about reciprocity and community building and the ethical dilemmas or ethical commitments that you're making to your methodologies and to who you are as people, not only as scholars and researchers, but how you're entering communities and maintaining those relationships and thinking about exiting them. I think all those things are very, very powerful. And each of you have also spoken about your positionalities as researchers and thinking also about what it means to be you doing what you're doing in online spaces. But I guess thinking about this thing of one word is uncertainty, and then swinging back to, I know you'll get to where you need to be going, I'm sure. Something that I think about is, I had heard advice from a professor in anthropology, Ruth Behar, who had said never to underestimate the importance of serendipity in the field. And this was advice before the pandemic. So I'm not necessarily sure that she was asking about the complications and challenges that you all are facing or have been like overcoming and working through. But I'm wondering, with all the changes that you've shared and all the thinking that you've done over the years, is there one affordance? What is one of having shifted or pivoted your plan? Is there something about serendipity that has been a benefit to you and shifting your thinking as you respond to the needs of your community and to our society? Is there anything that has led to the asking of new questions or ways that have stretched your thinking that you think has made your work stronger for it?
I can speak to that. I think that I was unsure how families were going to experience the virtual programs, like literacy programs. But when I spoke to them, they really also talked about how, first of all, how helpful those programs were, including some of like the one-on-one tutoring where their child had another person, another adult in their life through this tutoring program twice a week, where they had, you know, a trusted relationship that wasn't in their house. And I'm not sure, I'm a parent, and the parents on the call who were home with their kids, you'll know that, you know, sometimes it was just a lot, and it was nice to have someone for that. That's what the parents said. It was nice to have someone else that they could, you know, work with and be excited about seeing. It was like a social outlet, even for kids. And then the parents reflected on having virtual connections with other parents in that space. And that was kind of unexpected. I wasn't actually looking for that information, but it was like a way that families engage with each other during that time that I didn't expect to see, and I did see. And so I saw the affordances of that virtual space, and I probably could have seen that camaraderie in person, you know, people catching up, but I think it became more than like sitting and having your coffee like they had been doing previously in person. And it became, how are you doing? How are we all doing right now during this crisis when we're at home? And so it became more of a support and an avenue for families to connect that I didn't expect to see.
I'll share something that I don't know if you can call it serendipity, but or maybe you can. But for me, it came down to timing, and so after I finished my qualifying exams, and I don't know how exams look like in other departments, but in our department, it's like an A and a B paper. It's exhausting, right? And I really just wanted to take a break. So I took a break, and you know, at the time, the project that I was working on, it's mixed method. So the project I was responsible for was doing all the quantitative stuff of this research, looking at how using this data set and looking to see how these how enrollment has changed due to the COVID shock. And when I was doing that work, my grandmother had she got COVID-19, and it was a very it was a very difficult time for our family, and she ended up passing. And you know, at that time, I just had to take a break. Like my advisor was basically told me, hey, you know, take as much time as you need. And really, in that time, it was just a time for me to just refocus and recenter myself. So when I came back from, you know, dealing with like grieving and dealing with, you know, the funeral and all, I really started to think really hard about, like, you know, me doing this dissertation. And, you know, my grandmother would always ask me like, hey, like, you know, she didn't understand the process. She's like, when are you going to be done with school? And so for me, it was an opportunity for me to say, okay, this has to get done. Now I had to find some energy and new purpose. And it was interesting because at the time, the project was on the qualitative side. They needed help. They needed more. They had to do more interviews. So they basically tapped me and said, hey, you know, if you want, why don't you come on and help us do some, and that was re-energizing for me. Like, you know, I can do quant stuff, you know, and I'm comfortable with it in degrees, but for me to jump on the qual side. And then my other advisor at the time said, you know what, why don't you ask them to see if you can use some of the data, the interviews they've already been doing for your dissertation? And they did. And it was great. I mean, so now I'm plugged in on both sides, but I have access to this data that's on the qualitative side, very robust. We've interviewed like 50 plus enrollment managers, and these are folks who you don't get access to without, you know, and the incentives were already lined up, but having our PI, who's very reputable, like able to get plugged into these folks. So again, I don't know if it's serendipity, but I think it's a repurpose of my topic has changed a little bit, but more it's the timing aligned pretty well so that now I can kind of now focus my energy and now actually be a little bit more excited that I'm now working more on the qual side, but then have the support of my advisors as well. So it's an interesting timeline, an interesting story, but it really has, I think in the long run, I'll look back and say, you know, things kind of, they happen and maybe they do happen for a reason, in that regard. Yeah.
Is Paulina gonna, I'm just checking before I say anything. You know, so it's interesting, you mentioned affordances, because I honestly, I don't think I've been thinking about affordances in terms of what the pandemic has done for me in terms of my dissertation, is in terms of like for affordances in that way. I think of the pandemic as being like the best thing to happen just before I became a candidate. And like I mean it was like it was just I had a really rough year health wise, and with my father's health. And about a year ago, he passed, and it was like right after I defended my proposal. So so all of the things that I really wanted to do in terms of this dissertation just felt so, I wouldn't say insignificant, but definitely like you look at like, okay, life, and then here are the things, all the things that I really wanted to do. Like for my prelim, I barely got to do the observations that I really wanted to do. I was really so keen on getting into the classrooms of these teachers in UAE and like seeing them teach. And I only got into one school. So I figured, okay, I'm going to make up for that with my dissertation. So I'd spent a lot of time while dealing with anticipated grief, like trying to figure out how can I do interviews and do observations virtually. You know, so I'd already conceded that I was going to do this whole study virtually. So I came up with, like, I put all this work into looking into a stimulated recall, which, you know, is typically done face-to-face, where a teacher records themselves, and, you know, and then you interview them about the recording and all this stuff. And I just, it was, yeah, I will just say that I was not as resistant to the idea of doing an interviews, like only interview study, once I realized how much my capacity to do all the things that I really wanted to do had diminished. And I wasn't fighting it. I wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna make this happen anyway. I'm gonna get out, I'm gonna get in these, you know, observations done one way or another, because I'm really interested in teachers' praxis, you know, what do they do? But what happened was then I had to really focus on, well, how do I learn about these teachers' experiences through their eyes? And I mean, I'm not gonna like, not gonna get into like all of, I don't know that this is really about Zoom when I say this, but when I talked about rapport, like one of my participants got like some bad health news, and you know, these teachers are meeting with me because they're 8-9 hours ahead of us, meeting with me in the middle of the night. And when they would tell me, they would message me about what was going on in their lives to let me know, like, you know, how these things might affect their interviews. But the bottom line was that they were going to do the interviews, and they kept telling me that they liked doing this, and they were doing this for me. You know, they were like, I really want to help you out, so I'm going to do this. And I'm like, okay, I don't think you need to do these interviews, you know? So, you know, we talked about, we didn't always just jump right into the interviews. Like sometimes we talked about how their health was going. And one of my participants lost her dad. in December, and she told me, I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna do it later. I'm like, hey, if you don't want to do it, I'm okay with that. But she was like, no, I think this will be really good for me. And so she was back stateside for her dad's funeral, and she knew about my father. So we just kind of talked on Zoom. She's in Virginia and all this stuff. So anyway, I'm just saying it's interesting because, you think about all of the logistical issues that could come up. And sometimes I think the pandemic kind of helped make some of these logistical issues a little bit easier to manage.
I'll probably say I think the serendipitous moment of some of the challenges that just kind of came my way unexpectedly was that it definitely put pause, I think, to a sense of rush that a lot of doctoral students will feel like they need to just get done and get out and produce. And a lot of that, is capitalist white supremacy at its finest, right? Of just like produce, for the sake of, not your health, not your mental health, physical health, your well-being, anything. And so I think a lot of the challenges that brought me to kind of the serendipitous moment was a lot of just like pause and just like reflect, like, what do you really want? Is the academy really for you? Are you rushing to like really get a faculty job? Like, is that what you really want? I think the like quick pace nature of kind of the PhD and the trajectory of like, you do this and then you do this, then you do this. It's a constant ladder that I think, especially for me as a woman of color, if I don't check myself, it's easy to participate in that unconsciously of like, I need to get this done so I could do this and what's the next move? And so I think the challenges of the pandemic, but also just the kind of hard stops of what I could not do with my research allowed me to like reflect on more than just my dissertation, but also just like, where am I going right now? Like, what is my direction? A lot of the challenges afforded me the permission to ask myself, do I want to do this work? Is it worth it? I think because I couldn't do the study I wanted to do, I was able then to ask myself, do I need this degree? And like, what is this actually for? So it allowed me a lot of meta like thinking and kind of critical perspective shifts of, refocusing and also just tackling, I think, imposter syndrome of when you're able to do that reflection and have that pause, imposter syndrome doesn't really work as well on you because you're kind of more grounded. So I think had I got everything I wanted and I was able to go through the loops and, run the little, rat wheel kind of to say, who knows where I would have been at, I think emotionally and mentally, if I did the study I wanted to do and I moved at the pace I expected myself to move. I don't know if I would say I would be better or worse off, but I would say now that even with the challenges, I am confident that I'm at where I need to be at right now.
Thank you to each of you for reflecting on that. I feel like I need much more time to process and reflect on the things that you've shared. I was thinking about Maggie, when you're talking about your work, you talked about allowing yourself the time, the space, the opportunity to grieve. And then in these responses, we've also heard about grief, not only for how your study might change, but grief in terms of your personal life and the things that are happening as we live our lives as human beings, not only researchers and scholars, and also grief in the lives of our participants and the people that we work with there, and how to be responsive to those things in a time when I will speak for myself and say that the pandemic has been a time where I have been felt stretched so thin to my own capacity to care for myself that to think about how to care for others is sometimes really hard. And to do it at something that's very important to you, as Paulina was mentioning, and to do it for something that feels, as Andwatta was saying, this is something that you want to do for yourself that is very important for you to have it done the way that you want to. It's a very huge challenge for each of you to have done with compassion and rigor, and to do in ways that are caring and humanizing to the people you've worked with. So I do have another question, and we'll also invite guests, so you can also not answer my question. And audience members, you can put a chat in there and cut me off. This is something I was wondering though, which is just, Maggie, you had ended yours earlier with a piece of advice, which you snatched my question right off my page, which was I was in some ways going to ask about advice, but I'm wondering what recommendations or advice you might have, or to researchers to keep them grounded in their ethical commitments, in maintaining their critical perspectives, their commitments to care, their connections with community, when situations call for adaptability, flexibility, change, major transformation. So it might be, what have you done that helped you to stay grounded as you are, sending these emails back and forth with teachers, or shifting, to have communications with staff members that you've never met before, or thinking about your response time. How do you stay grounded in your ethical commitments? Or what advice would you have for others as you navigate that? Therapy for real, seconds to that, all the way. But I don't know if you would like to address that question, any of you. I think it's very powerful to hear you speak about the changes, things that were unanticipated. And there is a sense, at least I'm hearing, a little bit of the grief or mourning. And also, Reuben, you use the word transformation, this like kind of, growing into something else that is also, I wonder if when you're in it, you feel it as inspiring and powerful. But on my end, I witness it in that way. But I'm wondering what words you might have, recommendations for others.
I think I'll give something off the top, something that has helped me. And this was actually a conversation that my department had put together, where the folks who had already been kind of moving through the dissertation or had graduated were kind of in a panel with us, similar to this. And something that really resonated with me and it has helped me stay grounded is that your dissertation, you put so much work, and it doesn't have to just be your end all. Like, it doesn't have to have all of your goals and everything you want to accomplish just in this one like document. Like, it is one, like someone told me, it's one piece of all the amazing things that you'll eventually do. And that has helped me stay grounded in the sense of like, hey, I don't have to solve all the problems of college access in just this one like piece of research. It's that this is one part of me that I'm going to take to get me to the next level, that I will continue to dedicate my life towards this work. And it was like an eye-opening moment where I was just like, I could say, okay, this doesn't have to be all my life work into this one thing, right? This is a stepping stone to something else. And that has really helped me tremendously as I'm kind of moving through.
I see that we have a question in the chat as well. I'm going to read this one, and then I see, Christine, you also have a hand, so maybe I'll throw both out there, and you can respond. I see some of our panelists have also been using the chat to respond, so I invite you to do that as well. Michael's question is, hi, Michael. How did y'all remain in conversation about relevant theories and other things you may have learned from taking courses while having to do your entire dissertation virtually or online? In other words, how did you stay in academic mindset or lingo while not having the community physically around all the time like we did pre-pandemic? Thank you for your question, Michael.
I could pick this one up because actually having gone to graduation this past weekend to support a lot of really good friends and colleagues graduating, this has been on my mind and has been on my mind for some time. So thank you for asking it, Michael. I think, especially pre-pandemic, it was different going through the struggle of a doctoral program when you at least had community to lean on, right? Especially in person, and especially when you could really discern like what was like within school, within coursework, within the dissertation world, and then also just socializing, being able to release and have the time with friends, in person and stuff like that. And I think that that was just really helpful to have, those times together. I think that it has been for me personally, it has absolutely been difficult. I will say a huge challenge to try to remain in community virtually, online, kind of through technology or FaceTime and phone calls and things like that, or WhatsApp, just because it's really truly not the same as in-person communication. And I actually, to Maggie's point, I had to grieve that this weekend in the midst of celebrating so much goodness. I felt such a sadness and a heaviness. And I actually talked to Andwatta a little bit about this, and I wasn't prepared to feel it, but there was this bittersweet feeling of knowing that so much of the community I started my program with is moving on, you know. And I think that that is something that you have to let yourself just grieve and recognize and accept that it is a lot harder. Like, it is a lot harder to try to remain in those types of conversations and spaces. And as much as you try and have good intent, I think sometimes when we think that we're supposed to be where we were at pre-pandemic, it only makes the letdown or the kind of failure to do so a little bit harder to accept. And so for me, I've just taken on that, like, yeah, this is definitely a time to like take it on the chin, because this dissertation stage virtually, like completely virtually and online, is not the same as like anything else, you know, I'm sure that's been done before. And so it's definitely a different skin I think you have to have in this game right now, where you're not able to remain in conversation the same. You have to be really intentional. You have to hop on conversations. You have to like be really intentional and mindful about your own energy and like when to put down those conversations, because it really never stops, right? Like when you're at home and trying to do this work, I'm at my kitchen table right now. And so it's like, when I eat dinner, I'm also right next to my dissertation stuff. And it's like, I don't get to separate it from that. Whereas like I used to have an office. So, you know, to that point, that I think it is just harder to do. You can do it, you know, through, again, like having community like group chats, or, you know, community like Zoom meetings that you can do for writing, or for, you know, accountability thought partners, or, you know, just kind of talking about literature. You can do all of that, right? And it's a lot harder and difficult, but I think the expectation has to be shifted of like, it's not going to be the same at all. And it's just going to be so I think draining. So just to kind of prepare yourself for that, and to actually, in the spaces where we're pulled to talk so much more about kind of the academic and the dissertation work, I feel like when I feel really pulled to do that, I actually pull back and I ask like real humanizing questions outside of the academy and our work and stuff like that, because I feel like we don't do it enough anymore now that, you know, we're kind of all like virtual pretty much. And so yeah, that to say that I think that it's important to just try to stay separated as much as we do want to remain in conversation. I think it's okay to like take a break from all of that, because at this point, it's really just kind of sustaining yourself and your energy, as well as thinking about, you know, the energy of other people. But it is difficult, Michael. It is difficult to try to remain in that world and have that community. So yeah, I feel for you and I hear you.
I just wanted to chime in on this. So I as much as I like being in like social spaces and stuff, I also probably more than that like being in like spaces where there aren't many people. So the pandemic was kind of like, oh great, I can just be alone, like, you know, my own world all the time. And what I noticed was that I'm an introvert, and unfortunately people don't believe this, but I'm shy. I am really bad at, I'm socially awkward mostly. So so one thing that I found to be really helpful was how much the academy has leaned into this whole like virtual sort of spaces sort of thing, right? These Zoom meetings and conferences and workshops and seminars and all this stuff. I know I am kind of zoomed out, but what like Zoom, like over it, kind of. But what I like is that like right now I'm at home, and you know, then I can go off and, you know, once I'm done here, like I don't have to get in the car, deal with traffic and all that kind of stuff to get home. I'm home. But what I did find was that I was struggling with all of these concepts that I hadn't learned in courses. that was my challenge. It wasn't like what we had in courses, because for some reason I suddenly had the mental space to reflect on all of these things that we had in courses. So things were coming back to me and I was like, oh yeah, and I'm like meeting with Christine and stuff and going, remember this? And like, remember this in this class that we had in our second year or whatever. And so for me, these things, I was given, the pause, the slowing down of things helped me sort of think about those things. What was really hard was that I was trying to use all of these theoretical concepts that were not in any of the courses I had taken, or barely in the courses I had taken. So here I am like, okay, who do I talk to about Black feminism? I'm like, okay, I've got a couple of faculty members, but I couldn't identify anyone in the School of Ed who was doing work on Black feminism and teachers, right? So what I found to be really helpful was being in people of color and women in the academy, like social media groups, mostly on Facebook. There's so many groups out there, people who are talking about the things that we're sort of thinking about. And that was helpful for a while. To a certain extent, it was really helpful to be in these groups and to just be around other people who were doing, who were using the theories that I was, trying to use and trying to learn more about. And as I was telling Camille the other day, going to AERA, thank goodness, I finally went to AERA. But it was like I finally had actual conversations with scholars who were using Black feminism in education. But the thing was, I was able to talk quite a bit with them because I had been doing a lot of reading and a lot of listening to like podcasts and things like that, but also because I had been in a couple of groups that they kind of faded off at one point, but at least I was in these groups where I could talk to people who had backgrounds in like critical race theory, Black feminism, sort of Afrocentric sorts of theories. So I think the groups are helpful in that sense, like social media groups. And I mean, like where we're meeting, like not just chatting, but we're like meeting and meeting virtually. So I just put myself out there. This is a great way for me, someone like me, to put myself out there. So joining these groups.
Thank you so much.
I think I'll just add really quickly to some of the things that everyone said, but really just trying to keep in touch with people. But it felt hard because everyone was overwhelmed and overscheduled and worried about themselves, their families, at different times of this. So yeah, it was really hard, but I also am an extrovert and truly missed just being able to, walk through and get the energy from, people in the grad lab, or go into the Brandon Center and say hello to people. So collecting data was sort of a way for me to get that, get that time with other people. I could sit in, I was observing, I was sitting in those meetings, but I felt like I was a part of something in a way that I sort of didn't expect to, that it would be so helpful for me as well. But yeah, just reach out to people and keep making those connections, even if they're tough to make when everyone is doing the same juggle.
Thank you so much for that. I think we do have time for another question. And so I would like to shout out Dr. Christine Quince, who has a hand raised. Thank you, panelists, for your responses to that. And if there are more questions, please add them to the chat. Thank you. Congratulations, Dr. Quince. We're here for you. Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Jacobs. So my question, and good evening, everyone. Sorry, I didn't greet you all. So my question is responding back to something Andwatta talked about earlier, or initially, in terms of like norm setting during interviews or the start of interviews. So I guess I'm interested to hear from the panelists of how did you all get your participants to open up during Zoom interviews? Because I think, a lot of times that can be initially hard, especially when you don't know the person. So if you're trying to establish a relationship over Zoom, I'm just interested to hear what you all did, if you all have advice for researchers that are going to continue to do their work over Zoom, assuming that the pandemic continues. I don't know if it ever stopped. You know, we're at a weird time right now, but just interested to hear you all's perspective of how did you get your participants to open up during Zoom interviews?
I would say similarly to Andwatta, you know, just having like a chat, like a hi, how are you? How's the weather? How are your children? I saw you, you know, at the this program the other day, or that was, you know, you shared that you went on vacation and you're back, you know, those kinds of things. So just connecting in the same way that you might generally, if you have, so I had that opportunity to do observations and like be around. But with parents, sometimes I didn't. They didn't know me and I hadn't been in that space. So yeah, just kind of like bringing a lot of warmth and care to what they were saying, especially when they're talking about their children, because I know how important that is to them. So even sharing that I'm a parent as well, I think was helpful in those spaces. Just creating that common ground.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, Camille said something. Should I check this first before I say? Okay. So yeah, so that was like something that I really focused on for the panel. My presentation today was the idea of reciprocity, because rapport, developing rapport, establishing rapport, sustaining rapport are a part of reciprocity. When we talk about the amount of effort that needs to, or care, as you know, as Maggie mentioned, and in alignment with, you know, a lot of feminist research approaches, care is at the center. And so, you know, it's all about like finding ways to show you care or take care of the study, the whole design, like in the questions you ask, thinking about the follow-up questions that you want to ask, and then in the interviews themselves, in this case it was interviews, you know, I started off all of the interviews with, you know, actually I just asked the participants if, you know, there were things that they wanted to know, any questions that they had, because we'd had all of this, you know, communication online, like messaging and emails and all this stuff. But I'm like, okay, so, you know, you know, so you've read this and this, and, you know, I'll tell you a little bit about the study, but I want to make sure that you're comfortable. So do you have any questions? Are there particular things that you'd like to understand more about the study and things like that? And then I also said, like, anytime they had more questions or thoughts or whatever, that I am open to hearing them. So if it was in the middle of the interview, or if it was at the end of the interview, it was after, between interviews, like I was open to that. And like some of the things that I did in the interviews was, I was very intentional about, because I did three interviews over the course of 3 months. So it was like an interview a month. I was very intentional about memoing between the interviews, and reflecting on the things that I really wanted to follow up on in each interview. And when we talked in the next interview, I shared with them, I said, you know, here's some things that I was reflecting on. Do you think, so I was kind of member checking too. Member checking is really important, is a part of reciprocity, but it's also just really important in terms of validity, you know, and research. And so I share with them my notes, and like, here's what I'm thinking about, here are my interpretations. What do you think about this? Does this sound like, you know? So I didn't I didn't approach the interview as though I had all the answers, because that's, I mean, like, why am I interviewing them if I have all the answers? So I just, like I said, I shared about myself, but I also made sure that they knew that they could ask me questions. They probed too, you know, they wanted to know things, the details, but that's really important if you're thinking about, you know, establishing or at least maintaining rapport. As Paulina said, it like it's humanizing too. Like I'm not just getting information from you, I am in a conversation with you.
Thank you so much for your responses there. Reuben, Paulina, I will open. We have a few more minutes if you wanted to add to those final comments, or if others have a question we want to muddle over in our minds that you'd like to add to the chat. Thank you for your questions. Yeah. I loved, Andwatta, also how you had talked about what does it mean to build reciprocity. And then you had mentioned, I start every conversation by telling them my story. The idea of like sharing who we are is reciprocity, not just compensation, but like, you know, entering into our work with the wholeness of ourselves as well. I found that to be very powerful. Well, I hope that everyone will help me in thanking and congratulating our panelists today for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, your journeys with us, and congratulations to those of you who are on the other side, and we are cheering for each of you, those of you who are still going, and I hope that you see the strengths in what you're doing as we cheer for you each step of the way, and send you encouragement, and as we mentioned before, stay in connection and community with you. These conversations are a great way to do that. So thank you. And Dr. Wilson, I'll pass things back to you. Thank you so much.
This has been wonderful. Yes, I definitely want to add my thanks again. You all have given me so much to think about, and just appreciate you all bringing your wisdom, expertise, and your heart this evening as you've reflected. It's also, you know, just really poignant. So yeah, I too just want to say that I appreciate Maggie's reminder to us to grieve, you know, grieve what we need to, including the loss of original plans. And I'm really struck by Reuben's use of the word repurpose. I think that's such a powerful word, right? Because it's, we change, we have to adapt, but to repurpose is about also centering on our intentionality, right? And sometimes adjusting those intentions. But as, you know, Paulina shared, it's also, you know, being true to the enduring commitments, right? For humanizing, decolonizing, anti-racist work, right? So that repurpose is allowing us to make those adjustments, but still like keep connected to like our passion. And you all spoke to, you know, that repurpose means recalibrating too, to make it more humanizing for our participants. But I especially, you know, appreciate how you all have shared how you've had to adjust to make it more humanizing for yourself, right? Because this time period has been, we've all experienced loss and fear, and yeah, you know, as somebody said, you know, it's as much as this matters, the dissertation work, the you know, research beyond the dissertation, you know, we have our whole lives that we have to be in tune to as well. And so I just really appreciate, you know, the way you all were able to like zoom in very specifically, but also like zoom out. And what you know, you talked about how these adjustments mean, you know, also like thinking differently about how to build relationships. Paulina spoke to how to change methods sometimes, right? But it's about taking care of ourselves, taking care of our participants as best we can in the process. So I just really just want to thank you. Someone, had to leave early and said that you all are amazing. And I think that's so true. And you've shared, your courage as well this evening, because you've had to enact courage to get to this point. And so just thank you so much. We appreciate it. And I think also what we've heard too, even, for me, I've been doing the work of critical qualitative research for a really long time. And yet, what you've shared today too is also speaks to why this matters, right? Like why qualitative work in particularly, not the other strands and approaches to research don't have great significance, but qualitative work enables us to tend to the type of issues you all spoke to, right? It's about being humanistic. So I think that's a powerful reminder for us this evening as well. So thank you all again for carving out time on a Monday night after many folks are tired from a really busy weekend. I want to leave us with a shout out for an event that we have coming up at the Create Center in 2 weeks. We will have an event, and let's see, Dr. Tanya Neff Chang, also an alum from the School of Education, dropped some information and a link in the chat. And I'm going to try and share my screen real quick if I can find it. Let's see. Well, I think you all can click the link as well. But in a couple of weeks, we will have a wonderful event in which Dr. Tanya, as well as public scholars from Detroit, will be coming together to talk about the role of storytelling in research. And it will just be a phenomenal opportunity to think about critical qualitative research outside the box. And this is a part of our community engaged speaker series. So none of the highlighted speakers are tenured track faculty members. There are folks with expertise, with love of community, with wonderful skills of storytelling and research and inquiry, who are going to come and offer us different perspectives and different methods about how to do this work. And they all have connections to Detroit, but what they will be sharing, we can take and apply to all kinds of settings, all kinds of cities. So if you're free to join us, we look forward to seeing you back in a couple of weeks, and that will be earlier in the day from noon to 1:30 p.m. And stay tuned. We'll be sharing the flyer again via email and our social media. So I will not hold you all anymore. Hope everyone has a great dinner if you haven't had it yet, as you've been with us. But thank you all so much for just making the time. Maggie, Paulina, Andwatta, Reuben, Laura Ann, and all of you who have joined us this evening. Thank you. This is so great. Feel free to unmute if you like. Yay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.